live, Mark.
We're live. Oh, good evening, everybody, or good morning, or whatever time of day it is. Thank you for joining the morning meeting. I was a little thrown off because one of my top sources just showed up in my inbox for the first time in a week. So I'm eager to
Ooh.
open that email, but I'll wait a moment. Thank you for joining. This is the two-way program called the morning meeting. Sean, Dan, and I, if Sean shows up, will run you through the day. This program is modeled on the network news morning news division or network news division's morning meetings in which they run through the day, provide analysis, and then in our O. Henry twist, we here take your questions. Stan has his hand up. You should join Stan and Professor Kenny in raising your hand to be part of the conversation. Please, if you've never raised your hand before, and I'll remind everybody, you can be from any ideological persuasion you wish. We welcome all voices here. Don't be intimidated by smack in the chat or the bleedings of those who forget about peace, love, and understanding. Be part of the conversation. I get texts and emails from people saying, well, the conversation's one-sided. Well, you can change that. Come on in and be part of the conversation. We welcome you here. Thank you for being part of Two Way. Dan, you keep an eye out for Sean while I run through the day book. The President of the United States today is in Washington, D.C., and he is having lunch with the Vice President of the United States at 12:30. If I were a certain type of reporter, I'd talk about being a fly on the wall, but I never say that. At 1 o'clock, his press secretary briefs. It'll be interesting to see what questions are on the minds of the White House press reporters who don't have this week off. And he's signing an executive order related to tariffs, I believe, at 4 o'clock, where he's basically imposing. I find it humorous that the president and his advisors are saying this deadline's for real. Unlike the other deadlines, this one's for real. Most reporting suggests no more trade deals are to be had in the next 24 hours. So he'll sign an executive order related to those countries that missed out. House remains out. Senate is in, doing various business. Mike Donlin, the President Biden's former top political advisor, and probably still his top political advisor, is doing his closed door answering questions to the House Oversight Committee. Steve Ricchetti, I can't remember, Dan, yesterday, did we all say he was going to take the fifth?
I sure did, and boy, he did not.
He did not. He had an opening statement, which they shared with the press, and he was defiant. And I have to say, from talking to one member of the committee, didn't convince everybody that there was no cover-up. He engaged in kind of the typical thing you heard from Biden folks when President Biden was still in office, which was nothing to see here. Everybody should move on. Mike Don, yeah.
And for those who didn't see, too, in Politico, they interviewed Joe Biden or his team, who said Biden's not paying attention and hadn't talked to anyone about this. And then Ricchetti told the committee that he had just spoken to Joe Biden about it.
Yes. There's an incredible piece in Politico Playbook today about rounding up sort of Joe Biden's life now. I recommend it if you're interested in that. We'll talk about Kamala Harris in a minute. Anyway, I assume Mike Donlin's not going to take the fifth if Ricchetti didn't, but who knows? And then Hakeem Jeffries is holding a press conference at 11. The Ricchetti thing, Donlin's at 10 a.m. 11, Hakeem Jeffries holds a news conference with Texas Democrats on this ongoing question of whether Texas Republicans are going to redistrict the state. Just about a half hour ago, we got the personal spending, personal income, jobless claim numbers. Let's throw those up. Basically, part of the stew of trying to understand what's going on with the economy. Fed's favored inflation guide shows consumer prices rose again in June. So inflation up, not a ton, but up, which is not good. And this is if you're keeping a score for the week of good news and bad news on the economy, you'd put this in the bad news category as people continue to dig into yesterday's GDP number and find that below the hood, there's a lot more negative than the top line number might suggest. Steve Witkoff in Israel today, first visit there in quite some time, meeting with Netanyahu to talk about Gaza. We'll talk about that in a minute. Joe Biden, aforementioned, 7 o'clock tonight, Eastern, is speaking in Chicago to the National Bar Association's Centennial Convention. I have to tell you, just as you can take the boy out of Delaware, but you can't take the Delaware out of the boy, you can take the boy out of the Senate Judiciary Committee chairmanship, but you cannot take the Senate Judiciary Committee chairmanship out of the boy. Joe Biden, and this is why part of why it was such a horrible fundraiser, he just is all about judiciary stuff and all about foreign policy, because those are the two committees he chaired. And so he will be in hog heaven this evening in Chicago at that speech. NTSB meeting for the second day to talking about that crash in Washington in January. All right, let's talk about trade. As I said, the White House is signaling no more deals. But last night, the president broke the news. He loves breaking news. 103 on Truth Social about the North Korea deal. The North Koreans have
South Korea.
South Korea. The North Korea deal would be a real headline maker. Here's a long Truth Social post, basically laying out the terms. Once again, trade experts believe if this deal is as the president advertised it, and unlike in some of the previous deals, the South Koreans are told are basically saying, yes, this is the deal. Another good deal for the United States, using the leverage the president has, including the fact that the deadline was coming. The South Koreans were eager to be not left out of the first tranche of deals, particularly since the Japanese were in there. I don't read the chat, but I glance at it. Yes, the Canadians are screwed. Here is Scott Bessent, Treasury Secretary, talking about the tariff situation on CNBC this morning, 105.
Are there other countries that have seen what's happening that are saying, we don't want to be the last country to make a deal with President Trump?
Well, look, we've got the August 1st deadline coming up, and as we mentioned before, the rates could boomerang back to the April 2nd level. South Korea was a special case because they had an election, a new government, so they were not in the position to fully negotiate. They came in yesterday afternoon. They presented a very good offer. President Trump moved the offer up a bit, and we reached a very good agreement where they will have 15% tariffs. They will buy a substantial amount of U.S. energy. They will make a substantial investment into the U.S., both from their sovereign resources and via private companies.
So there you see the announced rates so far, courtesy of our friends at CNBC. UK at the low end and goes up from that 10% up to 20%. Dan, you know all those flags?
Yes, I do now that I see them. I don't think I would have been able to identify Indonesia if this was a game show.
Yeah. The Vietnam flag is elegant and simple. And remember, it was said by the administration, Lutnick and others, you don't want to be Secretary Lutnick, you don't want to be the last one to make a deal because the rates get worse as we go forward. That's not been true like in a linear way, but it is true that the president continues to appear to strike deals that are far more favorable to the United States than I think his critics anticipated, assuming, as Dan constantly reminds us, these must be actually codified over a period of time. So, Dan, what do you anticipate happening now? Deadline's tomorrow. He's signing the executive order today. Do you think, the tariffs will go into place and then he'll start to do additional deals in the short term? Like, when would you expect the next tranche of deals to actually be consummated?
Probably in the next week or so. I mean, look, whether these deals, as I keep saying, like we don't have the details, kind of how they play out. The fact is, he is getting deals. So if you're now one of the countries that hasn't struck one, you're kind of isolated. Like the U.S. is going to keep humming now with all these other countries, and you're in a corner. And he's probably going to jack the tariffs up even higher. I mean, other than China, I don't think, and maybe India, there's no other country that could kind of has any real leverage with us. So I would imagine other countries will now have to come kind of on bended knee and probably end up eating a tariff higher than 15%. So, I mean, on some level, that I mock the art of the deal. This is a smart thing, right? You want to be first. And if you're last, it tends to be one of the worst deals you're going to get.
Yeah. I read somewhere that the president's going to talk to the president of Mexico today.
Yeah.
The Canadian situation is even more complicated by Canada's position now that if nothing changes with Israel, they'll recognize the Palestinian state come the fall. Any sense of what's going on with Canada and Mexico?
I mean, I would kind of take the same thing I just said, which is if you're Mexico, strike a deal and then Canada's isolated. I mean, then that you have a bigger problem because he's, if there's 3 players in NAFTA and 2 have a deal, you're sitting there. So yeah. The Mexicans seem quieter. They're not as brash the way the Canadians are much more vocal about not accepting a bad deal. So I would imagine he strikes a deal with Mexico in the next week or 2.
Right. Okay. Let's talk about Russia. We spend a lot of time talking about what President Trump is going to do now that he set this deadline to deal with Putin. talking about sanctions, talking about more military aid and other assistance to the Ukrainians. We don't spend as much time trying to figure out what Putin's doing. And of course, that's a bit of a black box, difficult always to game out what he's doing. But he continues to put right in Donald Trump's face his unwillingness to stop. Yesterday, overnight, more attacks on Kyiv, loss of life, building destroyed. And so it's not clear how many people were killed by the Russian attack. Zelensky gave remarks this morning to a European group, play you at some length, because I think he does a good job of getting a sense of the body language of Zelensky, as well as his continued emphasis on the moral dimension of this conflict. Here's Zelensky in Helsinki, 107B, please.
They knew the bombs would hit it. 16 people were killed. 43 were in Russia. Started a war that Russia keeps dragging on, a war that only the Russian leadership wants, a leadership stuck in another era. They are mentally stuck in another century, a time of brutal violence, depredations, and total disregard for human rights and equality. We all know such ideas and such times must never return to Europe. And we all know how to protect ourselves from that, how to protect Europe from what today's Russia is bringing. And I believe Russia can be pushed to stop this war. It started it, and it can be made to end it. But if the world doesn't aim to change the regime in Russia, that means even after the war ends, Moscow will still try to destabilize neighboring countries. It will keep spending huge amounts of money, resources, and maybe even lives to do so.
So, look, there's corruption there. He's not been perfect as a leader, but you got to say this is one of the most remarkable political acts of endurance and bravery and determination that any of us have seen since anyone on this platform has been alive. Just extraordinary that guy is still going and has still got his country and is still facing down Goliath as David. Dan, I know you don't know Putin personally, but what's he doing? Like, what do you think Putin's goal here is? Is to simply tell President Trump, no, like I'm not gonna give in? What does he get out of doing this?
Yeah, I think so. And it's not just Putin, but their spokespeople have been fairly dismissive. Every time we kind of set a deadline or try to arrange talks, the Russians kind of say, like, thank you for, your thoughts. And they keep, Trump wants to end this, and therefore he would squeeze Ukraine to kind of take a deal, and they would ultimately get what they want. I think to Trump's credit, he tried to get a deal. And when the terms were kind of getting so unreasonable for the Ukrainians, he did stand up for them. And to your point, the fact that Zelensky has taken so much criticism from Trump, but kept his head up, kept plowing, tried to fix it with the president, has tried to remain close. I doubt Trump loves that he's talking about regime change in Moscow. That's probably not going to go over very well. But I think Putin really thinks he'll get Ukraine at the end.
Yeah, it's going to be fascinating to see if the president follows through here, what MAGA says, because the Wall Street Journal editorial page, Lindsey Graham, Bret Stephens, there's a lot of cheering for Trump to say, thank God he's finally standing with the West. And it's going to be interesting to see if he does move forward and how much what he does differs at all with what Joe Biden either did or would have done under a comparable situation. But this feels to me more like it's coming to a head than it did before. All right, Israel, extraordinary. As I said, Witkoff is meeting with Netanyahu today. The president on Truth Social this morning said this, 108, moving back towards the pro-Israel position rather than what's been the case over the last few days where he's been critical of the Israeli government. The fastest way to end the humanitarian crisis in Gaza is for Hamas to surrender and release the hostages, right? That's the very pro-Israel position, saying as the Israelis do, if Hamas would just do what it needs to do, there'd be no humanitarian crisis. There's obviously some truth to that. Israel is now dividing both the left and the right. We see it now with a lot of folks, particularly younger people, who don't have the traditional Republican or Trump attitude towards just reflexive support for Israel. They look at it as just another forever war that they don't want the United States to be involved in. And they don't have any particular allegiance to Netanyahu. And you see it on the left now. Dan, you and I were talking about this earlier, where Mamdani, to the extent he drifts away from some of his previous statements on the Middle East and on the Palestinians, he faces wrath from the far left, which also has no loyalty to Israel. So as on trade, as on immigration, as on a few other issues, the Bernie Sanders wing of the Democratic Party and the far MAGA wing of the Republican Party is just not connected to Israel the way Donald Trump is, the way Chuck Schumer is. So where do you think we're headed there in terms of both the humanitarian crisis and Netanyahu's next steps?
Look, I think it's a similar conversation to the Russia issue, which is Israel wants to finish the job. That's the phrase that they keep using, and they want to get rid of Hamas. I think one of the interesting things about Trump's statement last night was, I think it's the Saudis, the UAE, and somebody else came out and called for Hamas to give up, which was astonishing. And I imagine that was due to the U.S. working with them to get them on board to try to split the Arab world here. And I think Trump needed to make that statement. But I go back. I talked about this a few months ago, which is I don't know how you can argue that we need to end the Russian war and stop wasting U.S. money with Ukraine and turn around and say we're going to keep arming the Israelis. Like just the raw politics of it for MAGA. Right. I'm not talking about my own personal view.
Yeah.
I think it's a problem because if you're Israel, you've come this far now. You're on the 20-yard line or the 30-yard. I don't think that Netanyahu is going to say, fine, it's time for us to stop. Hamas kind of remains somewhat intact. Iran is trying to regroup, and we're going to now just, go back to the way things were. So, I said this yesterday, the Israelis are not saying, yes, they're suffering, and we're going to try to fix this for these children. They keep saying it's fake news, literally fake news. So there's a difference there.
Yeah, I'll be super curious to see what kind of readout we get from Witkoff today.
And Carolyn Levitt and what she says today.
Yeah, totally. Watching both those. All right. I find it insane how little reaction there is in the press about Kamala Harris's decision not to run for governor, including on this very program, which I'm currently hosting. She was the Democratic nominee for president. And this decision has implications not just for California, obviously, but what it means for her presidential prospects. If you read all the reporting, and I've done my own, it matches with what I see in the papers, people are mixed about whether this suggests she's going to run for president or not, right? And if you read her statement, like it's the Talmud or the Rosetta Stone or Sports Illustrated, it's hard to say whether she's leaning towards setting up a nonprofit, et cetera. I got an email yesterday from one of the smartest Democratic strategists I know with deep experience in presidential politics. And I was asking him various questions about her and running and whether it's about fundraising or whatever it is. And he said, Mark, she'll never be president. She'll never be president. And that's, I think, Dan, the view I get from most donors, most politicians, most Californians, and most strategists, that they just think if she decides to run for president and try to become the nominee in 2028, even though she's currently the polling front runner off of name ID, and even though she has a very big grassroots list, she will not be the nominee. Thoughts?
I agree with you. Almost everybody I know, when people do kind of horse race, when people are either, in writing in public or in private, kind of handicapping the field up until now, even though Harris has been leading, and I think that it's due to name ID, nobody talks about her. Nobody takes her seriously. And I think it is remarkable that the tree kind of fell and people just kind of said, okay, she passed on the gubernatorial race and that's it. Look, the challenge for Harris now is supposedly she's going to put a PAC together to be able to raise money to travel the country. There was a report that some people at the DCCC are talking to her about hitting the trail for campaign for House races. I'll be really curious to see who invites her. I don't think any swing state, any really heavy contested race is going to want her in there and want her, going before local press. But she's now got a window, if we're going to be, optimistic to go fix some of these narratives, right? That she doesn't really know what she stands for, the word salad, she won't talk to the press, that she's cautious. Like, what on earth would what's the rationale for her running? Because Reagan and Trump, the last two to run kind of 3 times, had very clear visions of where they wanted to take the country that were consistent throughout their history. She is the most inconsistent politician of the modern era, arguably. So the first things first, you're going to have to convince people why you're a serious player.
Yeah. All right. Let me ask you 2 more questions about her. I keep reading that she's got a great grassroots list. So she had her own list when she ran in 19.
Yep.
Does she have the Biden-Harris list from the presidential? Is that hers?
Yes, because it became her campaign account. So she should have, it is her intellectual property, all those names. Correct.
All those things. And not just the people who signed up after she became the nominee.
Correct, because it was one campaign, so the database was Biden-Harris. She was allowed to take that because her name was on it, even though it became Harris-Walz. So she should have the entire, list of people that helped her raise 1 point, whatever it was, 6 billion. So,
again, the report, she's going to start doing podcasts. She might form an organization. As you said, maybe she'll campaign for people. If you were advising her and she said, Dan, I know I have a problem with the media, the elite media. I know I have a problem with donors. I know I have a problem with the strategists. I know I have a problem with the elected. How can I address it? How can I get it? Assuming she wants to, and I don't believe she will, but what could she do? Given, and not in the abstract, given her limits as a performer, what could she do to make those people think anew about her? Because right now, as you said, they're not interested in her being the nominee.
Yeah, look, there is an opportunity. You have to sit down with them and you have to kind of put out your theory of the case. You have to eat a little crow about what went wrong and why you weren't able to be successful, your shortcomings, and you need to have a plan, right? I mean, go in there. It's like if you're trying to sell a stock or something, you need to have a theory of the case. And I think the media, donors, people will listen to her. The problem is, even now when she's giving these speeches, she says nothing. Like, it's just kind of, she would have to sit down and put a theory of the case out there about where I'm going to lead the party and what I'm going to do to address my shortcomings.
Sean, I think the challenge for all these candidates, but I think it's particularly acute for her because she had her turn at the plate. Most of these other folks have never been at the batting cage. Is what is she for to help the real lives of real people, particularly in the economy? She had some sort of housing plan. I didn't understand it at the time. It certainly didn't break through. Is if you were advising her, is that something she should go spend time with like policy people and try to come up with something, or is that not the route back?
I think she's got 2 fundamental problems. Dan put his finger on one, and you're bringing up the other, which is you've got the personality and the policy, right? So when she talks, it doesn't sound like somebody who actually got the message. She still does the word salad stuff. And that's, I don't know how much you can overcome that. And then to your point, I think on the policy front, part of this comes down to coming back and saying, these are the challenges that the American people face right now, and this is how I'm going to solve them, and this is the way forward. But they go hand in hand. You can't just give a good speech and if you don't seem credible and authentic. And the problem is, in the few things that she has done since she has reemerged, it doesn't sound like she's still the same person. And I don't know how you fix that. And I think unless she was willing to have a really honest, come to Jesus kind of discussion with someone like Dan that said, look, donors, base folks want someone who actually feels like it's relatable. And if you just jumble things together and cackle, and I'm being respectful about this, like, it's not going to come up, like, they won't hear what you have to say next. And that's the problem, is that they're not going to listen to the policy if they don't believe you as a person.
And the other thing too, Mark, that I forgot to say here, and it's the elephant in the room, how does she handle Joe Biden? Because Donald Trump was unpopular when he left in February of 21, but his policies were popular again by mid 22, right? On the economy, his focus on immigration, there was kind of like a longing for him. I don't think there's going to be a longing for Joe Biden. So you have to, before you do anything else, figure out how you're going to, and it cannot be, again, no separation at the hip. It just can't be.
And you saw how Buttigieg tried to do that, right? Where he said COVID and the border were 2 areas. I give him a C for how he handled it, but at least it was something. And he acknowledged that there had to be daylight. And so I wasn't particularly pleased with how he did it, because it was almost like he was like, I have to say something, so I'm going to come up with an answer that's pretty obvious. And the COVID one is a cop out, to be honest with you, because it's not you know what I mean? It's not blaming Biden. It's saying we were all wrong. And the border one is obvious, but I think you're absolutely right. If she comes out and it's just nothing the same, she has a similar problem. So the other, to your point, Mark, I think that there's an area where if I were her and I was serious, one of the things that I would do is fly to Wilmington and sit down with President Biden and say, sir, listen, I was honored you chose me to run. I do want to run again. I've been talking to donors. I think I can do it. I want to pay tribute to your legacy and the fact that you chose me. But there are three things that I need to say we should have done different, or that I'll be different on. And here they are. Are you good with that? And I actually don't think this is a tough thing, because she is a woman. She's Black. She's from the West Coast. I mean, she's a lawyer. There's several just inherent things that are different that she could find ways to use those attributes as a breaking point without getting into deep things. And so I've never thought that this was that big of a challenge. But if I were her, I'd fly out there, have a meeting with him, get him on board with the strategy, and which I think he would, and then go from there.
All right. Well, here's where I disagree with you. You play Kamala, I'll play Biden. We're sitting in the House and going to. You just say the last sentence of that pitch, and that's why, Mr. President, I need to. Go ahead.
And so for that reason, this is what I need to do to run.
Are you fucking kidding me, you son of a bitch? That's what he would say, I think.
No. So you're going to meet with Hunter.
And then he goes on a book tour and gets his revenge.
So just so we're clear, I think she should meet with President Biden, not Hunter Biden.
Yeah, no, but Joe Biden would say that too. He also likes that Anglo-Saxon verb. All right, a few more topics, and to your questions, please raise your hand. Scott Bessent, we talked about this on two-way tonight, last night, said about the worst sentence of all time, if you want to open the door to Democrats demagoguing on Social Security. And to be clear, there should be personal savings accounts related to Social Security. The Social Security program will go bankrupt if we don't make changes in it. And one great change, I believe, would be to take the magic of compound interest and allow it to work for all citizens as an option for those who prefer to have that rather than the fixed benefit. That having been said, what Scott Bessent said last night, that the new childhood investment accounts as part of the reconciliation law is a backdoor to privatization of Social Security, was just a ridiculous thing to say. Inartful at best. It will be used by Democrats in perpetuity. This morning on CNBC, the Treasury Secretary tried to clean this up, going beyond his tweet from last night. Here he is, 110. As I said, here is Scott Bessent on CNBC, 110.
Third time
About the privatization.
No, it was ridiculous. I was giving an interview, and I was talking about the $1,000 baby bonds that every American citizen, every newborn is going to get. The Democrats hate this program because
they don't.
It brings capitalism and markets to every American.
It does.
Not just their constituents at the upper end. And over time, the compounding is going to be an incredible supplement to Social Security, not a replacement. It is a complement. And what I said was Social Security will continue as it is. It is intact. Everyone will get their check every month. But it's very exciting to me that there could be a big payout at the end of, when people turn 59 or 60 for the first time, Joe, because as you know, bottom 50% of households in America do not have financial assets, and President Trump is giving them financial assets.
So Hogan did an incredible job, Hogan Gidley, last night, explaining how he would try to get the secretary out of this. I'm sure Caroline Leavitt will be asked about it today, and I'm sure she'll say the president's promise never to touch Social Security, end of story. Dan, is this over now, except for the fact that the Democrats will beat it, or does Scott Bessent need to have a take 4 on this, because that didn't quite settle the matter?
Yeah, Democrats are going to keep running on this. And I think that what's key for them now is Trump said he would never touch Medicaid, and they touched it. Now we can argue, is it always fraud and abuse? Is it just budget savings? But now you have another statement where he has said, I'm not going to touch it. And you have somebody kind of bragging. And I said this last night. It's so sweet to have Breitbart, all behind him, and it's on video. They're going to say you can't trust them. That they are really, he says one thing, but he turns around and does another. And now there's two pieces of the pie for him. And that there's some substance there.
Sean, my original interpretation, and despite the Treasury Department wanting me to say I was taking it out of context, we played 2 minutes on the front end and back end. Originally, I thought he meant this is a model for eventually privatizing Social Security. I now believe what he meant was we're not privatizing Social Security, but this is a way to supplement, just as he said, retirement savings by having a system that is private accounts, that is invested in the market. So if that's what he meant, shouldn't he just explain that's what he meant? Because he didn't really say that just now. It's clearly, as even I did, without the benefit of a staff.
That's the answer. And that's not in a pejorative way, but if you or I or Dan can say this in 3 sentences, then he should as well. This is, to Dan's point, they're going to hammer this. This was an unforced error from a guy who is, this is sort of like the guy in class who gets an A every day and then randomly, gets a D, and you're like, what happened last night? Are you okay? And it's an unforced error. But I do think he should clean this up ASAP. Caroline's going to get asked about it. Whatever the line is, they need to get it agreed upon, and just say exactly what you said. Look, the bottom line is this could be a supplement. Social Security was never meant to be a retirement account. It's inadequate. This is going to allow people to build generational wealth that they own. Blah 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 blah. I mean, I don't think it should take much to clean it up. So just do it and get it over with, because the longer this is one of those things that every time you clean it up, it gets worse. So get it straight. I can speak from experience on this. If you don't get it right the first time, you just create a further problem. So get it down, write it, get everyone to agree. And this is what the one difference that I would think is that Bessent needs to say, this is how we're going to tamp this down. White House, Caroline, you're briefing at 1. Do you agree with this statement? If not, tell me now, but I need you to echo whatever I say. So what is that line that we're going to go out with? But it has to be consistent, because there can't be daylight what she says at 1 o'clock today with what he said.
Yeah.
Or will say.
And there's no erasing what he said. I'm as a student of Scott Bessent, I thought he was pretty uncomfortable just there. He was not the silver-tongued devil that has been such a valuable asset for the administration. I want to move on to another topic, but he was asked about the Fed stuff and about replacing Powell in the search, and he was fine. He was funny and interesting and decisive, but for some reason,
the only thing that I can think of from a staff standpoint is that comment happened late yesterday. They may not have recognized, because it was at Breitbart and didn't get the blowout that it initially would have if it was just like some random interview. Maybe that they didn't realize until this morning before the staff got to huddle what the right answer should be. I mean, that's the only issue, because I was trying to figure this out. How do you not, knowing that your boss is going out another interview, any normal staffer would say, okay, we got to clean this up. Here's the line. I've run it by the White House. Everybody's on the same team. That should have happened. I just got to believe the timing screwed this up.
We know Caroline will be ready at 1 because it would be malpractice not to be. Sean, why do you think the White House has said nothing yet?
Because it's 9:33 and they have to get into the president and say, this is one where you need to say, here's what he said, or here's what I think we should say. What do you want? And you literally need the president of the United States to say it. But to my earlier point, if I'm Caroline, I want to make sure that, because Ledge Affairs is getting blown up right now by all the members of Congress who are like, what the hell did he say? You've got OPL that's getting blown up by a bunch of outside groups that say, what does this mean? Because some of them are probably excited. Some of them are pissed. So you have to literally have this thing buttoned down that there's no dissent from what this means. So I know this sounds easy, but it's 9:34. And her staff is probably running a line by everyone else. Then they're going to get it to the president. Trump's going to say, I'd rather say this. Then she's going to take that line, run it back by everyone, and say the president wanted to tweak it to say the following. Does anyone have a problem with it? But that kind of coordination does take some time, especially with the president that's very, very precise as to how he wants his views represented.
Yeah. It's interesting. Schumer was very aggressive. There have been a few others, but I'm surprised that Democrats haven't already jumped on it, because it's July, almost August, and if they handle it well, the Republicans handle it well today, it could, I'm not saying it's going to die forever, because Democrats will recycle this forever, but there's no firestorm, right? It's not leading the websites, and I think Democrats, I'm surprised they didn't do something gimmicky to make it front and center more than it is.
I'm surprised some 2028er. I mean, this was a ball on a tee. And Mark, you said this last night on 2-8 tonight. I'm really surprised.
Yeah.
Just Josh Shapiro, somebody did not say
Josh Shapiro.
Absolutely not.
Just have your staffer hold up the iPhone and say, Mr. President, here's a message from me to you. Leave your grubby hands off of Social Security, Scott Bessent and his plutocratic friends. I mean, it's effortless.
And he's a hedge fund manager, former hedge fund man, the whole 9 yards.
And again, reporters don't really care about this because they don't care about Social Security. And again, people who claim to care about it mostly want to kill the program, but because they don't want to do anything to reform it. But I mean, like, it was not even on MSNBC this morning. It was not a big deal. And I'm just really surprised. Sean, go ahead.
So I was just going to say to the broader point, we've talked about this before. If I was at the RNC and I had not blasted out a bunch of stuff by now, I would have gotten my butt chewed. Right? This goes to the broader point about where the Democratic Party is. You have Schumer's office, Ken Martin's team at the DNC. It's 9:34. The second that the White House puts a statement out, okay, which hopefully will be within, because I would get something out before the 1 o'clock briefing by 10:30 at the latest, right? Despite the coordination that I mentioned, I think they understand the magnitude of this. They'll get something out. It'll be a statement from a deputy or something like this that says, we run whatever. Once that's over, it's an easy response from a reporter, asked and answered. We've made a statement, the Treasury Department, blah, blah. If you're the other side and you don't use this window between when the official response comes out and now, then it is unbelievable malpractice. And the idea that the DNC, Schumer's office, Hakim's office, the Senate, the House caucus, Dem caucus machine, this is just pathetic. And I say this because we see this continued pattern. I told you when I went and testified in front of the Senate Judiciary Committee, they walked out of there's no response. I don't get it. It's like a team not showing up to bat.
And again, just tweeting something out doesn't do it, because the press is not going to pick it up, right? They should be, building a back door and driving it in front of the Treasury Department, something, right, to propel it forward. We'll see. Here are 3 topics we're not going to get to because there's so many hands up. I just want to go to questions. But just so you know, we were going to talk about the stock bill in Congress. And again, another thing where the far left and the far right populists are teaming up. Mamdani dealing with the police stuff is super interesting, as well as dealing with the Middle East, as Dan pointed out. His position changes related to Israel are unlikely to convince too many people in the center, and there now is restiveness on the left on these issues that he's moving to the center, and they don't like it. And then finally, first episode in a while where we didn't talk Epstein, but and there are some developments, but we won't get to those unless people want to ask about them. So bring in folks for questions. Again, as always, peace, love, and understanding reflected in your very being as you raise your hands. Unmute. Tell us where you are, Luke, and ask your question for Dan and Sean.
I like the yellow.
Oh, thank you. This is one of my favorite shirts. This is Luke in China. I wanted to talk a little bit about Epstein. No, I'm joking. Not Epstein. I want to actually talk a little bit about the UK. There's actually been a very interesting thing that's been going on since last weekend, which is the UK has been putting in a lot more privacy laws within the internet, especially with IDing for places like Twitter or X and Discord and some other places. So it's kind of a question I have, because I'm seeing that the EU is also trying to do this, and also Australia. And, working in the game industry, we already had an issue with privacy a while ago, and whatever the EU did, everybody kind of just followed it because, companies are very lazy and they don't want to have 2-tier systems. And so I'm worried, is this going to kind of happen here in America? Because, living in China, I kind of have to have no privacy, but I feel so much happier when I have a little bit of privacy back at home.
Dan.
I honestly, Luke, don't know what the issue is. You're like what the UK did. That's the first I've heard of it. Forgive me for not knowing.
They're not huge First Amendment fans over there. They're fine with the government interfering with people's privacy and access to information. Sean?
Yeah.
I will say this: I can be cocktail dangerous with with this subject, but that's as far as I go. So maybe a little further than Dan, but not much. I'm still intrigued by whether, like, we had that online children's safety bill come up in the Congress. So like it's an issue that obviously is a problem, regardless of what country you live in. I'm still not completely aware of where the UK in particular went too far on this digital services stuff. I know the tech companies aren't in favor of it. And I know that the president, obviously, like, it's being heralded as a crippler of the First Amendment for our folks. But I'm intrigued as to where that line is, that somehow what was good largely supported by conservatives in the U.S., where the UK and potentially the EU went further.
Luke, do you want to explain what they did?
Well, what they were trying to do is, Sean's right. They were trying to protect the kids by having examples of, you can't go to this website unless you're 16 or older. And then one of the things a lot of them are asking about is you have to take a picture of your face to get authenticated, which for a lot of the smaller companies, it's just they don't have enough money to. For example, Newgrounds will not, which is a famous Flash-based game and video website. They don't have the money to do these kind of executing these kind of things. And so this is kind of hurting smaller websites with a popular community. And this is also a problem where, now you have to show your face. So where's the privacy where you want to be a whistleblower? I mean, there's a lot of issues with that as well. Or, there's a lot of big things I think that could come to America, not because we have a law, but because a lot of these larger companies, they have to do it in the EU and the UK and Australia. So why don't we just do it for everybody?
Well, if that's the case, I will say there is an increasing view, and it's bipartisan, that the internet's is the Wild West. And the internet companies always say, "Oh, we can't stop something, right? One, it's going to break our business models, and two, it's impossible." And I remember this on the copyright issue when I was a lobbyist and would work on this. And famously, the founders of Google and Al Franken got into a fight on this. And Al Franken's argument when Google's like, "We can't stop the copyright infringement stuff," was, you do it for the Chinese. So don't tell me you can't do it. You don't want to do it here.
Yeah.
So I think to say that children should just have access to anything, I personally don't like that.
Yeah.
I'm not comfortable with that.
Yeah. Luke, thank you. I will say one of the 20 books I currently want to write is The Mastery of the Lobbyists for Big Tech in the last 10 years, who have just run circles around even the handful of members of Congress who understand the industry, and there are very few. They just basically take out full page ads saying, "Please regulate us. We want safe, fair regulation. Yep. We want to protect children," and then they just kill everything, and they're geniuses at it. And all those lobbyists deserve big raises. I want to mention one thing I meant to mention in the day book. There's a funeral today for one of the 4 victims who lost life on Park Avenue, Wesley LePatner, who worked at Blackstone. And many people I know knew her. I didn't know her, but she sounds just like an extraordinary person. And so that funeral's taking place today. And to the extent we have stuff to say about it after it takes place, we will tonight on Two-Way Tonight. All right, Deborah, welcome in. Tell folks who don't know where you are, what's on your mind for Dan and Sean.
I'll say, Mark, too, one of her kids went to school with one of our kids, and the school sent an email around last night.
How old are her kids?
I don't know, but one of our kids goes to a very small school. There's no more than 30 kids. So when one person's parent dies, it's noticeable.
Yeah. Deborah.
I will say today, oh, I'm sorry, Deborah, real quick. I just, today is obviously a day to reflect on her life and honor her and give the support to her family. But considering what we talk about, what we do, I think it will be interesting tomorrow to talk about who went, how it was portrayed, and the political context. Unfortunately, again, there are things that sometimes are unseemly that we have to talk about because of the political consequences, this being one of them. But I do think that how this is played out is something that will be discussed tomorrow politically. So who shows up, who doesn't, what their critique was, etc. will be interesting.
Deborah, thank you for waiting.
That's too bad for the woman and the family, but yeah. I raised my hand and a friend actually urged me to come on today because I was a big follower of Dr. Vinay Prasad during the pandemic. He seemed to be one of the people who was willing to speak out against the consensus and has had a history of really wanting to promote real evidence-based medicine, seeing that a lot of things get approved that really haven't gone through rigorous approval, seeing that there's a lot of medical interventions that actually don't help people but cost a lot of money. And so he just resigned from his position at the CBER at the FDA because he was kind of gone after by Laura Loomer and the Wall Street Journal.
Yeah.
Their critique of him was, one might say, maybe there's something to right. What changed, if you guys have any idea of what changed that these pressure campaigns would have some effect? And does this say that ultimately pharma has power despite who's in the administration?
Yeah, so I know about this case, and I can't answer your very well-framed questions. I will say this: there's another story in the papers today about Laura Loomer and her power and influence, and I'm all for her First Amendment rights, and the president's welcome to listen to anybody he wants. But for a part from public life and their jobs because of accusations, this White House is willing to listen to Laura Loomer and her demand that people be fired for things, true or not. Even if true, she's seizing on a few aspects of people's lives. So, Sean, do you know about this particular case well enough to address it, or just speak generally about it?
I don't. I know about the West Point case that I think you're alluding to as well, but I don't. And I think that's the FDA one. I will say, just generally speaking, is interesting because there has been, particularly with this infusion of MAHA. So I do stay in touch with a lot of these issues, and it's amazing the back and forth about it, because it goes both ways, which is, it's fascinating to me sometimes to get a call about so-and-so siding with the bureaucrats too much. So-and-so isn't MAHA enough. So-and-so did this. And for me, I feel like, and I don't know if I'm being told to spin me up or to see if I can suggest something, but it is fascinating how this has occurred in the last several months, where really individuals, not just at FDA, but as you know, I just mentioned there was another case at West Point, where people are, a lot of it is directed from the MAGA leadership, if you will, or influencer. But then, like I said, within the FDA and HHS world, like, it's been fascinating to me to see the head turning of this person sided with the career folks too much. This guy's, in bed with pharma. And, I don't know heads from tails in a lot of this, but it is fascinating to see how people are getting weaponized.
Dan?
Boy, I'm embarrassed. This is Stump Dan 2 for 2 here. I do not know much about this. I'm just seeing some people here on our team are texting us about some of the details of what went on. I'll just say I think their pharma will always be a very powerful lobby. I'll be very curious why they moved him out, and if any of the people you mentioned are consultants to folks. But we'll have to see. That's an interesting.
I think what was most interesting was they took him as being a socialist. Like, that was, one could maybe argue, okay, maybe he's stopping fast tracking drugs take 10 years. I can see having a complaint for how long some things get approved, but the way they seemed to try to get him out was to get people saying he's just trying to cut costs because he wants government health care, blah. Like, that was the way to try to get him out, not question him on anything else. So
yeah, well,
look, if you want someone to go, find things that know your audience and go sell them. So
Loomering does not involve comprehensive and balanced approach. to someone's background. Deborah, thank you. Appreciate it. Stan, welcome in. Tell folks that don't know where you are, what's on your mind.
Hey, I'm here in Conroe, Texas, and I'm a government teacher. I've not mentioned that before, but this is my last day with you guys live. I have to catch you on YouTube. I'm back with the kids and on the 13th, and we show back up to work actually tomorrow for some of us. But so my question is redistricting in Texas. I know you had mentioned that early at the top of the show, and so Dan Crenshaw is my representative, but he's going to have probably the hardest primary fight he's had since he got into office against State Representative Steve Toth, because under the proposed maps, they've taken some of Crenshaw's loyal territory and taken it away, and they've added some loyal territory of Toth's to him, to the map. And so my question for you here is, real quick, is do you think these maps are actually going to have time to go into effect, not just Texas, but Ohio, Florida, wherever? Do you think they're going to have time to go into effect for the midterms, giving probable court challenges? And if they do go into effect, how do you think they're going to change the discourse in national politics after Trump is out of office? Because right now, this is all kind of geared towards helping Trump, but he's going to be gone. These guys are still going to be there if these maps go into effect.
Great question. And I'll tell you before I tee it off to Sean and then Dan, there's ambiguity. Nobody can answer that in a definitive way. But Sean, what are you thinking?
I'm glad you brought this question up. I'm dedicating half of my show tomorrow to this for this exact reason. That it was funny. I was the head of incumbent retention at the NRCC in 2000, and California had an opportunity to really do this during the normal decennial process. And there's a whole dynamic about Mark, you might remember there was a senior member of the California delegation whose brother was in the legislature, who they were trying to pressure to do to really squeeze more, and he wouldn't do it.
And he wouldn't do it. Yeah, I forget.
And he wouldn't do it.
And Gray Davis wouldn't either. Yep.
Right. And the thing is that, to your point, like especially in Texas, what I get worried about, and this is you're squeezing 5 seats. 3 I get, 5, and you're creating 3 majority Hispanic districts. There is concern that a lot of these people voted for Donald Trump, and then what happens after he's gone? Are they still going to vote Republican, or were they one-time or two-time Trump voters? So I do get concerned on this. I will say the data that is available to map makers is unbelievably increasingly specific and
sophisticated.
Sophisticated. Thank you. That's the other S word I was looking for. And therefore, I'm hoping that they're really doing this. So look, what I haven't heard, and this is where in the past where I have seen the issue, is the squealing. And if you're a current member of Congress, especially in Texas, I have not heard a single one openly squeal. And that says that they're not as concerned. And that makes me feel a little good about what's happening there. But I do worry that sometimes you overreach and you jump the shark and you try to go too much, and it benefits you for one cycle, and then you're screwed when the trend doesn't continue your way. So I just hope that the data is something that they have looked at. They looked at the trends, and they're saying, don't worry, it's not just one. Because if we look at if Texas has an issue and the delegation flips, we're in big trouble in a couple of cycles.
Dan.
Yeah, I was just that obviously can't predict what will happen, but the history of these attempts to squeeze the rag as much as humanly possible is that you end up opening up multiple Achilles heels for other members. Because let's say there's a member that wins 70-30 and you take 20%, or 15% out of that district, and it gets down to 60-40 or something in the right environment, as you say, without Donald Trump. Does that member suddenly become exposed in a tough election cycle? And so, I think it may work to hold the House. And so you worry about tomorrow type of thing. But it's a dangerous game in Texas trying to wring all these seats out of there.
So I coined a phrase back in the day called political atrophy. And to Dan's point, if you're an older member that has won 70-30 forever, and you've never had to run a race, and therefore your political machine has died up and shriveled up, and suddenly it goes to 60-40, and someone takes a shot at you who's a self-funder, and you haven't put up a yard sign since yard signs were cool, that's going to be a problem. And that's where I think they've got to think about the long term, because if you're a member that's 70 years old and that person's going to retire, when a new person runs in 2 cycles, is that person going to have the same inherent advantages that the incumbent has? No. So I hope they're thinking beyond 1 or 2 cycles.
Yeah. Let me just say 3 things to add to what my colleagues have said. Number one of the dangers in this is mitigated if the president endorses strong candidates, right? Because part of the challenge you have is when you make the change of district is could somebody lose a primary, right? And a weaker candidate win. President's endorsements in almost every race in the country matters most in a primary decisively. In Texas, it would be decisive. So if the White House can figure out who can win a general and the president can endorse them to victory, that's a mitigating factor. So then they only have to worry about the redistricting as it pertains to the general. Number 2, the Democratic Party is not on some roll of momentum in Texas. And so again, it mitigates the danger a little bit. There's no, despite, efforts, et cetera, there's no momentum for the Democrats there that's discernible. And then number 3, related to number 2, but different, is demographically, people have been predicting Texas is going to go purple because demographics. That all is stopped if Democrats are not dominating Hispanics. Now, as has been said here and elsewhere, just because Hispanic voter votes for Trump doesn't mean they're going to vote for any Republican. But nonetheless, Hispanics are leaning more Republican in Texas than they were before. And that puts a circuit break on the one thing Democrats had going for them, despite no fundraising, no state party, weak recruitment, problems with the national brand. The demography is destiny was something they were counting on. It may still happen, but they can't count on it the way they thought they could because of the loss of the Democratic Party with not just Hispanic voters, but working class voters in general, including African-American and Hispanic and Asian. All right, Stan, thank you. Grateful to you for coming on. Sean, what do you have tonight?
Sydney Sweeney is going to join us to talk about her. Wait, no, that never happened. It's Thursday. We're doing a panel campaign. We've got Amber Duke from the Daily Caller, Jared Stepman from the Daily Signal, and Brianna Lyman from the Federalist breaking down all of the latest news, including this whole thing that went on the Stock Act, whether or not we're finally going to see members get banned from stock, the exchange that President Trump had, and Nancy Pelosi's retort on CNN. It's going to be fun.
Nancy Pelosi on CNN was on fire.
Donald Trump is covered in it, or the presidency is covered in a future ban as well.
Yeah.
Well, that was the Josh. That was a Josh Hawley outburst.
So the space time continuum will be tested tonight because also at 6:00 Eastern time, one of my guests will be Amber Duke. Not sure how she's going to pull that off. It's going to be like a Mrs. Doubtfire thing where she's got 2 computers up and she just keeps unmuting and
this
is
turning up her camera. And we're pairing Amber tonight with Nomi Kunst. So those are 2 of our favorite guests, 2 brilliant younger people with great ideas about America. So join me at 6:00 for Amber Duke and Nomi. And then at 4:00.
Well, it's more like join us for Amber Duke.
Exactly. At 4:00, time to go back to Brooklyn. Dan and his 4 castmates from the group chat live in studio, 4 p.m. Eastern time for the group chat. Dan, Robbie, Batya, Nina, and Emma Jo. Please join them for all the day's news. And again, it's the only panel program where you get to ask questions and make comments as well. So join them at 4:00 Eastern time today. Then I'll be there at 6, and we'll have full coverage of Caroline Levitt's press briefings, and maybe more of what Scott Bessent has to say about the privatization of Social Security.
And don't forget Trump's executive order time.
Trump's executive order time, and we'll have lots to talk about at 6. So join us for that. A reminder. To see if our colleagues, they tell me this every day and I haven't done it in a while. If you'd like to be a sponsor of this program or another, send us an email. Guys, you have that address? Because if you don't, I'm going to stop saying it. Here we go. I knew it. If you want to sponsor our two-way program, send us an email, sponsors@twoway.tv, to find out about rates and opportunities to be part of tapping into the two-way community. And if you'd like to be an investor into two-way, we're not currently raising money, but we're always happy to start a dialogue with you. Send us an email to, I think it's invest.
Venmo at Sean Spicer.
Invest@twoway.tv. Send us an email if you're interested in investing. Professional certified investors only. Thank you very much. All right. Thank you for watching. The three of us will be back in 23 hours. It's Friday, which means an opportunity to hear winners and losers of the week, as well as what to look for over the weekend. Sean, do you already have yours in a laminated card, or are you still working on it?
I'm pretty locked in, although I will say the executive order time and Caroline's briefing have the opportunity to change. Potentially, I would say more the loser. I think I have the winner locked in.
Okay.
But this could be a game changer.
Okay, we shall see. Thank you all for being part of the two-way community. Thank you for watching. We'll see you tonight and tomorrow. Have a great day.
Bye-bye.
Well, let's look at that process, because you shouldn't have 2 days of past stuff in there.